and the Climate and Energy College Alumni Network, and is the second in a series of 3 seminars on climate and energy. So once again, this seminar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Climate and Energy College website. So the format, the later part of the seminar will be run as a Q&A session. We'll open the floor to questions, and please, for those online, use the raise hands button, which can be accessed via the reactions button down below, and it looks like a smiley face, and that's at the bottom of your screen for the Zoom. Okay, so our speaker today is Wolf-Peter Schill. He's the Deputy Head of the Department of Energy, Transportation, Environment at the German Institute for Economic Research, or DIW Berlin, and leads the research area Transformation of the Energy Economy. His research focuses on renewable energy integration, energy storage, electric mobility, and other sector coupling strategies, and his methodological focus is on the open source power sector modeling. And at DIW Berlin, he works in various research projects with grants from the German federal ministries and the European Commission. Okay, thank you very much, and look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Kelvin, for the kind introduction and for organizing everything. So it's really a pleasure to be here today. I hope everyone can hear me. If not, great. So how's the German Energiewende going? Insights from the Open Energy Tracker. I want to mention in the beginning that this Open Energy Tracker I present is pretty much collaborative work with very cool people from my group. So you see the little names here. Most important, Alexander Roth has been part of it from the beginning, and then 2 other PhD students joined a bit later, Adeline and Felix. I'm not sure if they are online now, probably not, but yeah, let me express my gratitude to the team. And also the reason that I can be here today in this beautiful city is that we got a grant from the DAAD, that's the German Academic Exchange Service, combined with Universities Australia, so we also acknowledge that. Let's see. So the German Energiewende, I'm not sure if this term Energiewende already entered the English language like kindergarten or Glockenspiel. So it seems to do. So I guess it's fair to say that it has like 3 main pillars. And probably the most prominent one is to make massive use of renewable energy sources. And then also to use renewable electricity for sector coupling. So make use of electricity to decarbonize the heating and transport sectors in particular. And a third pillar, which is kind of receiving probably not enough attention, is a massive increase in energy efficiency. Well, if you then look at these 3 domains and see how it's going, then you could come to the conclusion that it has been somewhat stalling the whole Energiewende process recently. And then entered a new government, the Ampelregierung, or the traffic light government. Are you aware of what this traffic light picture means? So probably not, let me tell you. So we have actually 3 parties forming the coalition. The red one, that's the Social Democrats. The yellow one, that's the Liberals. And the green one, well, you can guess what party that would be. And they set out to kind of revive this whole Energiewende thing. And then we said, okay, there seems to be some kind of need to actually assess what does it mean with these new targets, where are we going, and where are we actually, and are we on track or not? And in order to follow up with that, we decided to create a little open data tool. And this is the very Open Energy Tracker. And what it really is, it's a kind of a lightweight website, which consists largely of graphs and some data and a bit of explanation. And it's totally based on Git, so it's open source. You can also download all the data behind it and the source code, and also the code that creates the graphs, if you like to also build them or build upon them, making use of a kind of lightweight package, mkdocs and plotly for the generation of the graphs. And we pretty much use it as a kind of sandbox thing. So it's really, you can really quickly try out new things and add new indicators and see how that goes. And delete stuff again. And it's quite dynamic, I would say. It's growing. So we're currently expanding that beyond Germany and are getting like ideas about all kinds of stuff, how you could build on this little platform. And then we have a second product, which creates a bit of confusion sometimes, which is the Ampel Monitor Energiewende, which is then really a dedicated DIW Berlin product, because also the comms people in my institute were super interested in like marketing these things. So we took a little subset or sample of the indicators we have on this Open Energy Tracker website and put them on the DIW Berlin homepage and explain a bit more, and also have a growing collection of publications there with our like signature journal, DIW Weekly Report, and blog entries, etc. But the content is all based on the Open Energy Tracker. This is then how these two websites look. So on the left, you see the Open Energy Tracker, and on the right, the German Ampel Monitor. And it just occurred to me that this is one rare example where the English translation seems to be longer than the German word. Or maybe our translation was just not that great. That could also be the case. And now I want to click through the Open Energy Tracker. So that seems to work. So we are focusing here today on Germany. And here on the left-hand side, you get an overview of the areas of fields that we actually look at here. So we have renewable energy sources in electricity and heating. We have electric mobility, hydrogen, quite exciting, I guess. Then two fields where we look at current energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, and recently added energy prices, that is electricity prices. And we'll, in the next 2 hours, I would like to walk you through all of this. No, just kidding. We go through a little selection of it. So starting with solar PV. So this graph here shows you, so over time, where we actually are and where we want to go. And if you hover over this here, you see currently we're at around 64 gigawatts in Germany. And what that means, to compare that a bit, because I mean, Germany and Australia are of course quite different in size, etc. So this means we have like 0.8 kilowatt peak per capita. And I looked it up. Australia has 1.1, so Germany is lagging a bit behind in terms of capacity, and of course even more in terms of energy. But this is going to change because we have a target of 215 gigawatts in 2030. So in 8 years' time, we will triple this or add a lot of capacity. And that would then mean like 2.6 kilowatt per capita. So it will be interesting to see who has then more in 2030, Australia or Germany. And just to get a kind of impression of the scale of this growth. So from these years on, we will add around 22 gigawatts per year. I think that is roughly the size of the Australian PV capacity early last year. So added year by year. So I guess it's fair to say it's quite massive, the expansion plan. And then you can ask, okay, how's it going? Are we on track or not? So if we zoom in here a little bit, I hope you can see it. There you could say, well, yeah, looks good. We're on track. Then again, if you zoom out again, of course, the government said we cannot just flip the switch in 1 second after being in charge. So there is a bit of a ramp up here, and the majority of the growth will only take place later on, actually only after the legislative period. You cannot see the green here. Hopefully the people online can see it. So we have also a kind of legislative period. Can you see it? Yes. Then it's just me being colorblind again. Okay. So the majority of the growth will happen later. So the historic trends are not that great. Like this 5-year period here, if you project that, then we would like totally fail. Recently, it has picked up again a bit, so that's the last 12 months, but still the growth rate needs to roughly or nearly triple in order to achieve this target. But then again, 2030 is, of course, not the end, so it will go on after that. And you see the scale changed quite a bit. So by 2040, the target is to have 400 gigawatt. So again, nearly doubling what we'll have in what we should have in 2030, which would then be nearly 5 kilowatt peak per capita. So we need a lot of largely Chinese modules, right? So I think it's important to see how massive this growth projection is. And then we just added here some scenarios from the Ariadne project, which we're also part of. So this is a large set of decarbonization scenarios that have the aim to achieve climate neutrality in 2045. And these are many, so let me add this corridor. Can you see a corridor actually? Online, yes. I can't. If I could see it, so this should be like roughly in the corridor or at the upper part of the corridor. So that would mean that these installations are actually also necessary to achieve or to be part of a scenario that is plausibly achieving climate neutrality in 2045. And maybe I should also, so beyond just the sheer data, say something about how this should be achieved. So with renewables, the main policy instrument is the Renewable Energy Sources Act or the Erneuerbare Energiengesetz, EEG. And these targets are actually now set in the EEG, so it's official legislation. And the main instrument is actually, support of renewable generation via feed-in tariff, sorry, not feed-in tariffs, via market premia for the large-scale installations. And these sliding market premia they're probably just like a contract for difference, except that they're not. So they only give you a kind of a guaranteed minimum price, but you can keep whatever extra revenues you may get if wholesale market prices are really high. That was something no one really cared about so far, but now we have an energy price crisis, and now this gets kind of more interesting. But yeah, I'm digressing a bit. And that means a large part of this PV capacity expansion will just be auctioned off. So there are tenders facilitated by the Federal Network Agency, and they will just auction off all these capacity additions. So let's move to wind power. That is one other like very important part of the future renewable energy supply. Again, where we are, so currently we have around 57, 58-ish gigawatts. That means 0.7 kilowatt per capita. That's actually a bit more than Australia. You have 0.4, I learned. And the goal is to have 115 gigawatts by 2030. So again, this needs to double. And that would mean 1.4 kilowatt per capita in 2030. Again, it doesn't look that steep, but if you think about it, we add like 7.5 or so gigawatts per year here. That is quite massive compared to historic growth rates we had. You can again see, are we on track or not? Here we are even falling behind this expansion path that is already kind of not super ambitious in the short term. And it looks even worse if we look at the last 12 months. So here we have to speed up even more than we do in terms of PV. So we calculated a factor of speeding up by factor 4 on average to actually achieve these targets. Again, 2030 is not the end of the world. So by 2035 already, it's projected to have 157 gigawatt. Oh, it's actually not projected, it's in the law. So that's the official German target now. And it just there will be auctions to achieve this. So this is really, all of this is auctioned off. And again, yeah, we have these Ariadne scenarios with quite a broad corridor here, but we are also kind of firmly inside this corridor here. Then let's move on to wind offshore. There are, by the way, also, so one main barrier for this is and why we're also lagging behind, is that it's quite lengthy to develop these wind power projects, and there are all kinds of regulatory and administration related delays, and there is quite a bit of local opposition to wind farms, which then makes things very lengthy. And now there has been a huge set of legislation to actually accelerate all this planning and admission. But it remains to be seen how this will play out. Part of it is that all the Bundesländer, or the regions of Germany, are now obliged to increase the land area they designate for wind. So, and we also keep track of that. But let's say something about offshore wind power, which is very different from onshore in various respects. So again, where we are, so we're at roughly like 8 gigawatts now, and the target is 30 gigawatts in 8 years' time. And again, here it's not so easy to see if we are on track, because there the expansion path is not as clearly given in the legislation. This is a separate piece of legislation, the Windaufseegesetz. But we just, because we don't have any other information, we just projected this linear growth path. And of course, that doesn't look super great here. So we have a lot to catch up. And also the trend is not really our friend in this case. So there just has been hardly any activity recently, because previous governments just thought, well, it's too expensive having offshore wind power. And despite the models showing us, well, we actually do need them. And the longer term targets are then really like staggering with 70 gigawatt. And it entails a whole set of new challenges, not only that you have to connect these offshore wind farms to the onshore grid, but also that you need massive grid reinforcement, because in Germany, the sea is only in the northern part and substantial parts of the load are in the southern part of the country. So that means you also have to transport this power. And these three together, like wind onshore, wind offshore, and solar PV, will then really make up the majority of German final energy consumption in all these long-term decarbonization scenarios. We also have, so we are not lacking targets. We also have a separate target on the share of renewables in the power sector. You can see it here. So last year we've been at a bit above 40% of renewable electricity. It's not technically, it's not really a share. It's a kind of, you relate two things together, which are not really a share, but you relate renewable electricity generation to the actually gross electricity consumption. That's the kind of way the official target is set. And this has to increase from 42 to 80% by 2030. There were also like longer term targets, which didn't like enter into force yet, but that's a bit of a separate question, but it is projected to then go towards 100% pretty quickly afterwards. And you may wonder, why is there this strange dip? So this looks quite bad. That is because 2020 was actually a bit of an outlier. There we had the COVID pandemic and electricity consumption decreased a lot, but renewable generation was more or less like it was the year before. So even without any capacity additions, as you've seen, just this share increased. And then in 2021, consumption picked up again, but renewables didn't. And it was on top like a really bad wind year. So hopefully this will change. There is some kind of early indicator, which is not exactly the same, but this is the share of net electricity generation in the share in net electricity generation, not in consumption. And there you can see it kind of picks up again. So hopefully this develops accordingly. Then that was all electricity. Let's move to heat. So heat pumps are really a thing now in Germany. I guess in Australia, no one cares about heat pumps because you don't have to heat, right? But we do, and heat pumps are now considered to be, I think it's now mainstream that heat pumps are considered to be one of the prime sources of getting our houses warm in the future. And here data is actually, oh yes, Malte?
Probably the share of heat pumps in Australia is higher because everybody has AC and then they just heat with AC.
True, that's true. If you consider all these kind of little single room ACs as heat pumps, then that's probably the case. Which is also why the data is a bit shaky here, because what actually is a heat pump depends quite a bit between these different statistical sources you can tap into. And there are also little heat pumps just for hot water, etc. So that's why you have to take these numbers here a bit with a grain of salt. There has been an increase in recent years, and currently we have around, I would say, 1.5 million heat pumps installed. And the new official target, according to the latest heat pump summit that took place like 2 weeks ago, is 6 heat pumps. And this is largely heat pumps in single or two family houses, like detached houses, so small scale decentralized heat pumps. On top, there may be heat pumps in district heating networks, like large scale ground sourced heat pumps that would probably come on top of that. But yeah, again, quite ambitious, like quadrupling the number of heat pumps installed in 8 years' time. And here, let's see how this develops later. If we look at the Ariadne scenarios, again, you can't see anything, but heat pumps will really, can you see it, Malte?
Yeah.
Okay, I absolutely can't see anything. So yeah, thanks. But luckily, as I said, it's a kind of a sandbox. So in this very indicator, we just tried out what happens if we implement other relevant scenarios, like a one from German Energiewende and from the German Industry Association. And all of them think, okay, heat pumps are really a thing. Just to put it in context, we have like 19-ish million of houses where people live in. So this would mean that really the majority of houses would be equipped with a heat pump in the long run. Only one, the German semi-governmental energy agency, they tend to favor molecules over electrons. So that has to be, it's been a bit of a debate. And so they think there is a role in the future for being it hydrogen or synthetic natural gas, also for like decentralized heating. But I think they are now getting more and more exotic with this view, just because it becomes more and more clear that these synthetic chemical energy carriers are quite expensive and you don't want to waste them for low temperature heating. So as time is running, I should move to electric mobility, which is also quite fascinating, I think. And we really focus here now on cars. We're also involved in super exciting research projects on electric trucks, but that's a separate thing. So let's look at passenger cars. This is, let's see how it's going. Zoom in a bit. So here we have the fleet, how it developed. So currently, there's really quite up to date. We have 880,000 purely battery electric vehicles in Germany. And we have a very bold target set out already in the coalition agreement of 15 million by 2030. So this is really quite staggering, I think. And just to give you an impression, the overall fleet is around 49 million vehicles. So this would be then kind of a share of around a third or so of the overall fleet of the stock in 2030. Again, are we on track? Well, here we also have our kind of standard linear approach with an average growth. Then you would say, oh, well, we're totally off track. But then again, for such diffusion processes, linear is maybe not too great of an assumption. So we, luckily, we are friends with, for example, some Fraunhofer institutes and came up with a logistic growth path that is more plausible when you think about the vehicle stock is renewed over time. But unfortunately, even then, we are not exactly on track at the moment. So we're already falling behind a bit. I also made a little comparison because I think it's interesting. So we currently have like 1.8% of the fleet in Germany is a pure BEV. In Australia, do you know what that share could be? Will it? It's actually 0.4, has been also a bit of growth recently. But because I thought Australia doesn't have electric cars, but at least there is a bit going on. Obviously in the ACT, I learned. And the major policy to achieve that is something we call, very positive word, the Umweltbonus, the environmental bonus. So you get 6,000 euros from the government, and at least on paper, an additional 3,000 euros for a new car, as long as it's beyond some threshold, so that it's not in the luxury segment. So you don't get it for a Tesla Model S, but you get it for most cars, which is quite a bit. And unfortunately, now we're still also subsidizing plug-in hybrids, but that will stop like next year because the government also figured out that that's not directly contributing to this transformation. And then as things are kind of sluggish here in the overall fleet, we also, there are no targets for this, but we also track the actual shares in monthly new registrations. And here, just for information, I also plotted the plug-in hybrids on top. But if we focus on the pure battery electric cars, there's been a bit of up and down due to various reasons, but we are now at around 17% last month. So yeah, every, what is this, sixth or so car last month was a pure BEV that entered that was newly admitted. In Australia, it's slightly lower, I learned, with 3%, but maybe we'll also catch up in the future. And I guess the main reason why this is not larger, given also these quite generous subsidies, is that there are just no cars. So you have to wait really for a long time. So waiting times are over a year for many desired models. So currently, like, supply chain frictions seem to impede the further transition. Yeah, transition. Yeah.
People tend to buy cars for Christmas, or what is it?
You mean this one here? That was actually interacting with the European legislation on average fleet standards, so emission standards of your average fleet. There was a huge incentive to bring electric cars into the market until the end of 2021. And afterwards, this incentive ceded a bit. And that is at least explaining parts of this, I guess. And we also look at charging infrastructure. Relatively similar picture. We don't have much yet. We have like 70,000 public charging points. So it's not stations, but single points. And the bold goal is to have 1 million again by 2030. Again, are we on track? Well, it depends a bit. There's a little bump, which we have to take care of. We are currently on a logistic growth path, but here again, I'm not sure if logistic growth is super meaningful. You could just build them. So yeah, if you are more on the positive side, you can say, well, yeah, we are kind of keeping track. But the government also said in the coalition agreement that the focus should be on fast chargers. So the majority of additional points should be fast chargers. That's the red one here. So currently we have the majority is like slow chargers until 22 kilowatt. Actually, Australia does better in terms of charging infrastructure per vehicle than Germany does. So we also have that here. We have like 12 BEV share one public charging points, and in Australia it's only 9. I learned. Quite good. And then I can't be here in Australia without talking about hydrogen, of course. You know, Germany wants to import a lot of green hydrogen, but at the same time also aims to produce at least some hydrogen at home. And this is the target, 10 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity by 2030, starting from oh, wait, let's zoom in, starting from like virtually 0. And the fun thing is not much happened. So this is IEA data. So the next data point was like here, October 2022. It didn't really grow yet. So a lot needs to happen. And then again, okay, this linear progression is probably not super great. So we also plotted this IEA hydrogen electrolysis database sorted by year to be commissioned. So this is where we currently are, or what we already have, so not that great. Let's see, under construction, also not much. Then there is this class of projects awaiting a final project decision. And that's then a bit more, yeah, adding up. And then the ones that are in various stages of more or less concrete feasibility studies, okay, that's then already reaching like 5 gigawatts. And then the more vague group of conceptual stages, that's then even more. And if you like add up everything, even those that don't have a commissioning year, then you get like more than 20 gigawatts already at some point in the pipeline. You could say, well, not bad. But then again, to achieve these 10 gigawatts, that means that really a substantial chunk of these more conceptual projects would also have to be realized, and all the others as well, in order to meet this target. But you, from this, you can already project that everything will come online at the very end of this 2030 period. And if you want to hear more on hydrogen, of course, Adrian will talk about it in the next seminar a lot, and how the diffusion could look like. So that will sure be quite exciting. And then maybe only quickly, I have to skip a few things, but let me very quickly have a look at energy consumption and imports. So security of supply, of course, plays a huge role. Already in the coalition agreement, the government said, well, we have to increase the security of our energy imports and especially diversify. And this is for the now most important thing, that is natural gas import. We also plotted some IEA data here, how they developed. And over time, all these darkish, nasty colors are actually imports from Russia. And they increased a lot after the Nord Stream 1 pipeline went into operation. And the actual imports from Russia were like in the same order of magnitude as the overall net imports, given that Germany is also a kind of exporter, or we are kind of transit land or country for gas for quite some time. And only very recently, we kind of weaned off Russian imports, but in the very hard way, and replaced Russian imports by other imports. And this gets even kind of more exciting if you look at the last 3 months we have in the data and compare it to the last 2 months of the previous year. So you see Russian imports, that's the two dark grayish parts here, they decreased substantially, but at the same time, overall net imports even increased, which is partly because we export less, but which is largely because we import much more from Norway and from, in this case, Belgium via LNG. So I don't want to say this is a huge success story, because prices also went through the roof at the same time, but at least they managed to diversify and actually even increase imports, which I find quite interesting. And then we have one thing that actually gets us the most media attention for this at the moment. That is the very up-to-date short-term natural gas consumption, because that is now one of the most important things. Will we get through the winter, and will our gas storage kind of suffice to keep us warm? And then the question is, how much do households really save? And the Federal Network Agency provides then weekly data on how much they save. And we realize this is good, but it would be even more interesting to see, do they save it because it was just warmer than last year, or because they changed their behavior? So two of the cool PhD students in the group devised some fancy machine learning approach, a random forest, which I wasn't aware of before, which is kind of something relatively new. And they then managed to, given all the data we had and training the model, they managed to separate then a behavioral and a weather-related effect, which then shows, yes, people have been, the red one is the behavioral one, which means, okay, people have been quite successful and constantly over the last weeks to actually save natural gas, not only because of temperature here, though it was like relatively warm, but also because of behavioral changes. And yeah, this is kind of a bit of an addition we did recently, but it gets a lot of attention. And now time is running out. I would have liked to also talk about, where am I? About energy prices, that is electricity prices, because we currently have a huge discussion about energy price breaks, which is a very badly coined term because it's not the price where you put the brake on, but it's really the bill. But and the government, the target was to relieve electricity consumers, so they abolished the renewable energy EEG levy that is now paid by the general budget. But unfortunately, then the Russia price crisis hit and the wholesale part of electricity tariffs went to the roof, and now we're at record prices, but we don't have time to go into detail. But you can explore it if you like in more detail here on this little tool. And with that, I go back to my slides. Yeah, does it work? So, and just a little glimpse into what is this Ampel monitor thing. I said it's a bit of a rebrand, but we also do have this signature graphic, which is essentially the comparison of the speed that we have in the trend of the last 12 months compared to the average speed needed from now on to achieve the 2030 targets. And this also got quite a bit of attention. And you see, we really have to speed up a lot, especially with offshore wind, but also in this electric mobility field, but also with wind onshore and PV, like everywhere. So if I would have to sum up how the Energiewende is going, I would say we now really have very bold and ambitious targets to really revive it. And I guess you have to appreciate that. But at the same time, we also see the speed across all these different domains has to increase a lot. And this, of course, needs not only target, but also very effective policy measures. And there's not a single one, but many, many, many different plugs to pull and things to do. And I guess, so we don't have time, but I guess it's at least partly underway, especially with the recent revision of the Renewable Energy Sources Act. That was quite some step forward. But currently, everything is kind of overshadowed by this energy price crisis we have. So don't look at the numbers, just this lower line here, that is natural gas prices. And they have, from a pre-crisis level, at some point they have had reached like 10 times the price. Then it was going down a bit again for various reasons. But electricity prices, that's then this this trembling line here in this way have just also increased because natural gas, of course, sets often the price. So that is why we have this energy price crisis. And now the most attention also of policymakers is really on these crisis measures, how to take off some of the burden of the consumers in terms of gas and electricity bills, also for industry. And one of, so relieving people from increasing bills is one thing, but of course, increasing the supply and transitioning to other fuels is another one. But as the targets have already been so ambitious before, there's just hardly any possibility to even ramp it up further in the short term. And we are seeing now all these frictions with increasing the transition speed. For example, if you want to install a heat pump, which would be the thing to do now to get off or get rid of natural gas, you just don't get the heat pump and you don't get the person that installs it. And this is now where a lot of the policy attention focuses on training the workforce and building supply chains for such key transition technologies. And with this tracker, so we find it quite useful and already expanded it to France, because we have a French member in the team. So Adeline did that. It's quite interesting. You can also click to what France aims for. And very soon we'll have Switzerland. That was kind of a accidental thing. We have some Swiss contributor that will come soon. And I very much hope to include Australia. That would be the obvious next country to include. And in general, as I said, it's a bit of a sandbox for us, but we think there may be potentially some prospects of growing this into some kind of international voluntary grassroots collaboration. And the thing is, it would of course be good to secure some funding, either for the whole thing or for adding particular countries. So whatever ideas you may have on that, that would also be great. Yeah, and with that, I'm already over time. Sorry for that. Thanks again for the opportunity to talk here, and waiting for your questions.
Thank you so much, Paul. So for those of you online who've raised your hands, I'll be inviting you to unmute your audio and you can ask your questions live. But before asking a question, please introduce yourself with your name and your affiliation. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay. Any questions online or in person?
Thank you. That was fantastic. I have about 21 questions, but I start with just one. Where do you see the we are in 2035, looking back, where do you see the biggest regrets could be coming from? And one thing I wonder sometimes, with 400 gigawatts installed PV, 5 kilowatts per peak per person, that is a lot of area. If there's a lot of agricultural area used for utility scale PV in Germany, there might at some point be a backslash of that is land use. So how much, for example, in the current expansion plans are dual use land use enforced, where you plaster every parking lot full, you have sheep grazing underneath, whatever. But more generally, where do you see the potentially biggest regrets could be coming from?
Thanks. That's a big question. I guess, like, in broad terms, potentially a big regret is that we don't do enough to secure or build up the supply chains needed for all these technologies, and that we may run into a situation where we again have dependencies on single countries. And I mean, PV in China is like the prime example for that. So we implicitly rely on essentially China supplying us with huge amounts of PV at hopefully low prices in the future. And I'm not sure if, or I hope this will turn out to work, but there could be some regret that we don't do enough to diversify also that. I know it's very hard to like rebuild a European PV industry, and steps have been taken to do that, at least to some extent. But with several of these technologies and some key components and materials contained therein, I guess there could be some regret later on that we say, well, that was too optimistic, we're just lacking the stuff. And for the land use thing, so I didn't do these potential studies myself, I'm just reading it, but it seems to be not that an issue. So we have a huge number of buildings which you could just use, and the majority of buildings is not used yet. Also with not only on the roof, but also facade integrated PV, which also works if you use like really cheap modules, not super high efficiency, but cheap cost. And if that becomes like a standard, you already add a lot of gigawatts, then we have now many like conversion areas and along the highway, like the things that shield you from the noise. There have been potential studies showing you can do a lot with that. And then actually agri-photovoltaic is also a thing. There will be like new tenders for specific projects that combine some type of agriculture and PV. It's probably not sheep in Germany that graze under them, but it's like more that you would do things that like to be in the shadow anyway, or not in the pure sunlight. And there are now lots of demonstration projects, but hopefully, so there are several Fraunhofer institutes pushing for this very much. Hopefully we'll see that really on a gigawatt scale in the future. So of all the troubles we have, I think land availability for PV is probably not the most serious one.
Yeah, thanks, Wolf. That was great. Dylan, soon to be from UNSW. I also have about 20 questions. I'll try two that are sort of related. You mentioned all of the targets you've got. There's obviously the EEG legislated targets. I was curious to know to what degree of formality the other targets have. So are they in legislation, or what body is setting those, and how are they legislated essentially? Also, is there any energy efficiency targets? I'm not sure, maybe that's a work in progress. And then the sort of second question, and I've kind of got an eye to thinking about how you might do this in Australia. And maybe this was somewhat lost in some of the graphics that didn't come through on the screen, was the scenarios that you were comparing them against and where they came from, and like who's, are they official scenarios? Are they independent analysts? Are they government agencies? And also, I guess related to that, how do they map to 1.5 degree scenarios or big international, IAMs or other. So yeah, how do you choose what scenarios are you comparing against there, and what goes in and what goes out?
Okay, thanks, Dylan. So I start with the latter one. So these scenarios, for most indicators, we just show these Ariadne project scenarios, and these are independent scenarios, but made by a kind of suite of an ensemble of models. And that's also why we have these corridors. That's part of this large-scale Ariadne research Copernicus project funded by the Research and Education Ministry, but it's like totally independent. So it's our colleagues from PIC and various other relevant institutes just doing modeling, but not official, but it's like research. On this one indicator that I've shown with the heat pumps, there we added some other studies as well. That one was the BDI, it's a German Industry Association study. So it's not official, but it's very influential. And the other one was German Energiewende, that's an NGO, but they are very closely tied to now leading personnel in the ministry. So it's also quite relevant. But we also had this, it's called Langfrist-Szenarien or long-term scenarios. That's an actual very, very large-scale study commissioned by the very ministry. So that was this yellow part on the heat pump graph. I think it was yellow. And they just released like last week, the new set of scenarios with climate neutrality 2045, while the previous one was 2050. And that's the probably most official thing. So if we had more time and resources, including other scenarios, then we would probably focus on that one as it's the most official one. How does it map to the decarbonization or to 1.5 degrees? Well, only in the sense all of them had the constraint to be climate neutral by 2045. As I said, the Langfrist-Szenarien in the previous version 2050, but now they updated it, but they don't put out the data yet. But that's how you map it. And in terms of the targets, so I guess the renewable energy expansion targets, they are most like valid and set into legislation and very serious. For the heat pumps, the target is really in a kind of white paper of the government. So that's probably less enforceable, if you like. Same for electric mobility and hydrogen. So that's not really, probably doesn't have the same quality, but I mean, we should take them serious, right? What they really say. And in terms of energy efficiency, it's probably not a coincidence that, so I jumped over one of the fields where we had a bit of that, but there are less concrete targets, and it's also part of a European legislation. So there's a European renewable energy efficiency directive, but there it's also quite hard to track because you then measure your actual primary or final energy efficiency compared to some reference trajectory, which has been calculated with some other types of models, and you measure it compared to that, and that's actually quite difficult to track. And also, I mean, always with energy efficiency, you have the question, what is the baseline or the point of reference? So that's more tricky, but also something I would like to focus more on.
Right, thank you for that. Dominic Davis from the Uni Melbourne here. Just question, what's the status of nuclear power in Germany, and what are the prospects of future nuclear power?
That's a good one. So we didn't include that here because it was set to be phased out in 1 month's time, like for good. And there has been a lot of fight about the remaining 3 reactors we do have. So 3 doesn't sound like much, but they still produce quite a bit of energy. So I once compared it, the last 3 reactors we had are roughly producing what the whole PV capacity is producing currently. So it's not huge, but it's also not nothing, right? And I'm not sure how closely you follow this debate, but there has been a lot of back and forth now with this new crisis situation, that electricity prices went through the roof, that many people made the argument, well, let's just keep the ones we have for a bit longer, or even let's put the 3 ones we phased out relatively recently, put them back into service in order to dampen electricity prices, but also to prepare for further contingencies that may occur in winter and decrease the risk of a blackout. And there is, I guess, some point to that, but especially the Green Party was really reluctant because it opens the box of having to discuss the future of nuclear again. And I think if there would have been like a really pragmatic agreement that we keep what we have just for a bit longer, but don't open up this huge conflict we had in the society again and stick to the general phase out, then that would probably have worked. But all the kind of nuclear brothers then tried to open the door and said, yes, that would be good, and we need new builds. And so the debate went like, we will keep the 3 we had for 3 to 4 months more. So they don't shut down in December, but in April. And that's then the kind of compromise, which I think drained a lot of political resources. And it's probably wasn't time too well spent given all the other issues we had. So there will be a little bit more nuclear, especially to decrease this blackout risk in winter, which I personally find a bit funny. We were talking all the time about blackouts, and Germany didn't experience a blackout for a very long time. The system is very secure. Well, at the same time, in Ukraine, people really have blackouts, and I find it kind of really weird that we talk so much about blackouts in Germany, and the risk is just comparatively low. But that's a bit of a personal statement.
Thanks, Wolf. That was such a great presentation. So
Thanks.
in relation to, you mentioned that there are contract for differences, or rather minimum prices, and contract with government for some of the renewable energy capacity. Are they thinking of doing a similar thing for hydrogen, given they have these very ambitious targets?
there has been talk, but there is not such an instrument yet. And frankly, I don't know where the debate is going. So currently, it's really more on the project level that you get support for doing large-scale demonstration or rollout projects, but we don't have such a kind of instrument yet. Could be that it comes, but there is an instrument now for hydrogen imports. There's this H2 Global facility, which does like long-term agreements or contracts with potential suppliers of hydrogen, and then does short-term contracts with German with the German demand side or German consumers of hydrogen, and takes away this commitment problem of entering into long-term relations. And that's probably overall more important because the vast majority of green hydrogen will actually be imported. But it's true that at some point, I think there needs to be some instrument for also scaling up the German production or domestic production. But it's the difference to electricity. I mean, it's quite clear. Electricity you just produce and then someone will take it off. And that's why you end up with things like market premia or contracts for difference. But with hydrogen, it's very specific companies or consumers needing this hydrogen. That's why it's harder to have such a general instrument. I see we're already over time.
Sorry, the microphone just stopped working.
You want to have this one?
This one's not working out.
Yeah.
Apologies. Thank you. Oh, I've got so many. Okay, so that was actually a really wonderful presentation to just get up to date with what is happening over in Germany and how it sits in the current European energy crisis. So for those online as well, so details for upcoming events, we'll put them up on the Melbourne Climate Futures Academy website and also the Climate Energy College. And also our next webinar will be Wednesday next week at 3 p.m. Adrian Odomela will be speaking on scaling up the green hydrogen supply. So thank you everybody for your attendance, and thank you all for your presentation.
And thanks again for hosting us.